Just start. And we're going to be recording it, of course. So I just want to introduce very briefly both of the presenters today. Both presenters have a long, in-depth history in copyright and trademarks, both associated with local copyright associations. We set up this session following Erica's completion of a thesis on IP and branding. She wears a lot of different hats, and she might touch on them when she speaks. But certainly she had some very interesting things to say when we saw the thesis and when we spoke to her about it. Many of us, of course, all of us have IP management requirements, and many of us don't do it that well. I'm sure there's some of us who do. I hope even those are on this call. So I'm interested to hear what Erica has to say about those issues and what she's found in her work. Alison is coming at it more from the marketing point of view. Her organization monitors what people say about brands in the market. And I think that's always interesting to hear. I think it's a critical thing for us to get hold of. Our social media management and our voice, our digital voice, is often really poorly managed, especially amongst our smaller companies who, we're fighting to produce a good product and put it in an attractive bottle, find distributors and get it out in the market. And increasingly, the digital world is becoming more and more important. And how we present ourselves in that world is something that, of course, we've spoken to brands about a lot. And I can tell you, when we look online and we see how many dead social media channels still belong to companies and are still up, it's a little challenging. But I won't spend any more time on that. I'll turn right over to Erica, who I think will also say a bit about her background, far better than I could, before she begins. And then after she is complete her presentation, we'll hear from Alison. So over to you, Erica.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I have been working in intellectual property since the year 2000. I work in copyright, and I also I work with the local copyright organization, but I also have a consultancy firm, and I work in all aspects of IP management and strategy. So the thesis that Vaughn referred to, I had previously done postgraduate studies in intellectual property law, and my doctoral thesis is in copyright in the digital environment. But I decided to further my studies and to look at intellectual property management and strategy specifically. So I had to look at an industry, and I wanted to choose one that was relevant for the region. So I decided, actually, after hearing an ad, I was driving home, I heard an ad on the radio, and they mentioned Don Ben's name. And I said, Don Ben? I went to school with Don Ben. And then I thought, well, why not rum? So Don, thank you. I will now start the presentation. I've made the assumption that the audience has some understanding of what IP is. So the session is not what is IP, sorry. It is really looking, at the application of IP in the business. And specifically, I am drawing the connection between branding and marketing activities and the role that IP plays in that. So first of all, we need to understand what I mean when I speak of a brand or branding. And often people will think of the name, the brand name. And yes, a brand includes the trademark or the trade name. It speaks to things like your packaging, your domain name, your product design. And importantly, these are things that communicate the product or service to consumers. More importantly is that these should be treated and understood as legal objects. Otherwise, it would be a free-for-all. So as you know, with a trademark, you should ensure you register it so that you have legal rights and exclusivity in your trademark. But the idea of a brand actually goes broader than that. And it would include things like your knowledge intangibles. So the business processes you use, the formulae and recipes you use. All of these help to position you in the market and are considered as part of the definition of a brand. And in fact, it goes even further, one step further, where a brand can speak to the organization as a whole. And an easy example would be Apple. Apple as a company has a brand. It is a fun company, it's highly innovative, it offers premium products, etc. So that is what I'll be speaking about in terms of a brand. So what is not very well appreciated is that there's a close nexus between IP and marketing from a strategic perspective. And this centers around the concept of differentiation. So in your marketing strategy, you're seeking to differentiate your products and services in the market. And IP is used to protect or to make exclusive these unique aspects of your products and services that allow for the differentiation. So the two are actually very closely linked based on the desire to achieve differentiation. Sorry. So here I show graphically this interaction, and the aims, the objectives are to align the two strategies. So you're integrating IP into your marketing thinking to allow for an expansion of your market, to allow for the maintenance of your market share, and to facilitate the creation of new markets. Importantly, is to understand IP as a business tool. And when you're developing your strategy, you should be thinking of all the IP implications as you go through that strategy development, and you should ensure that what you're planning to do aligns with your IP strategy. So often you will go about doing what you have to do, and then the IP registrations or implications are treated as an afterthought. Another mistake that is often made is that a lot of people assume once they own intellectual property that they own something of value. And this is not necessarily the case, not at all. IP on its own is meaningless. And if you're going to invest, take the time to invest in IP, you should be doing so strategically. And I keep mentioning this word strategy and strategic, because that investment should be premised on an economic return. And the use of IP is to, or the value of IP is to create exclusivity. So you want to be able to offer unique resources, products, and there's a term for it. You want to use your IP to create valuable, rare, inimitable, and non-substitutable resources or VRIN resources. And if you think about it, that's how you would describe a premium product. So you want to use your IP to secure exclusivity in the marketplace. And based on that exclusivity, and I'll explain it a bit more, based on that exclusivity, you want to be able to generate premium pricing, increase sales, and to have a positive economic effect generally. So the various forms of IP play different roles. And these functions include allowing consumers to identify their products in the marketplace, to communicate quality, and to assist in building your reputation. And it has certain impacts. So first, it provides certain functions, and then it has some impacts. So it allows you to offer a unique selling proposition to your consumers. It allows you or facilitates the development of brand loyalty and development of standards. And then if you have the right resources in place, because this is all within the context of the organization. So you have to have all of the assets, so a good marketing plan, distribution agreements, etc., to allow you to then appropriate value. If you're able to appropriate the value, you will see an economic effect, as I said before, in terms of increased sales and being able to achieve premium pricing. So generally speaking, this is how you seek to use IP strategically. Any questions so far? Okay. So in terms of the global spirits market, there are a number of trends, sorry. I just showed you some photos, but what are these trends? So you have from the perspective of product innovation, of course, we're all aware of the premiumization that's happening, the growth of artisan, craft, and organic rums, flavored and spice rums, the ready-to-drink and cocktail market, the transition to the digital environment and e-commerce. You also have important technical innovations. So in terms of the use of robots in manufacturing processes, the use of cloud and blockchain, AI, the photos I just showed you, this with the Johnny Walker, the labeling, they have smart labeling. And of course, the Jack Daniels was to show you the emergence of a number of augmented reality apps to allow for more immersive experiences by consumers. Importantly, and I didn't do an in-depth search, but I decided to look at the international patent databases to get a sense as to what's happening in terms of patenting in the sector. As you may know, patent applications and patent grants offer rich resource material in terms of understanding the direction of an industry. And what I saw was quite a few patent applications coming out of China. And when I looked at the sort of patents they're applying for, I see that they're looking at things like the aging process specifically, and they have patents that look at things like, the creation of certain profiles, taste profiles, etc. And what did that say to me? It said to me that the Chinese are, it seems to be looking at how to replicate certain expressions and so on, and maybe to speed up things like how do you speed up the aging process to achieve certain results. And it made me think of what's happened with wine and the entry of China into the wine market and how they've really rapidly grown. So from the discussion I've had with industry players in the region, I don't think a lot of attention is paid to the patent system. But I'm suggesting that if you want to get a good understanding in terms of where competitors and potential competitors are going, you need to start paying attention to patent applications. Now,
perhaps I could stick my oar in here on that previous slide, because I think it's worthwhile to note that okay, so I mean, the Chinese don't make rum, and so it's interesting that they actually have some patent applications for rum. I imagine, that maybe some of the research institutes are doing the same for whiskey and brandy and other things. But what strikes me here is that one of our points of differentiation in terms of our product, or the premiumization of rum, is natural aging in the barrel, which is expensive because you lose money every year as the spirit evaporates through the walls of the wooden barrel. But it does present an authentic product. And over the last decade, and perhaps even earlier, lots of people have been playing around with whiskey and rum and how you can age it more quickly by pressurizing the product, running steam through it, putting in oak chips under pressure and stuff like that. And of course, this is the first patent definitely is part of that process. And there's a well-known, certainly on social media, operation on the west coast of the US that's actually selling a rum product that's aged in its own patented production system, where we suspect they pressurize the liquid and with the addition of wood and try to imitate a aged feeling. I mean, it's useful to look at this, and I completely take your point about seeing what the rest, what research is going on and what your competitors might be doing. I think for us, the consensus so far is that connoisseurs and people who have high discretionary income that want to buy quality products are still looking for authenticity. So it may be that one day more and more standard product will be made using some of these techniques, but in a premium space, these are very much frowned on. Anything that's unnatural. And also, just to, if you go back a slide, I think I wanted to say something there as well. Yeah, and part of our playing on heritage and premiumization is that we aren't in the RTD space a lot, or flavored and spice rums, or even organic rums. Some people use the word artisan, but you can argue that that word has been misused over the years. But certainly, I think our producers are, even at a larger level, still quite small. And I think as we grow larger, these issues will become more and more important. And certainly one of the things we're interested in, of course, is how the ability of cocktails to pull through demand for your premium products. Because, gone are the days where you might only put a cheap spirit in a cocktail, really. what we would like is to see people put in really expensive premium rums in cocktails. And so cocktails are a great way to pull through demand for your premium products. But to be honest, spice rums are also growing massively. Captain Morgan, which is the market leader, used to be their flagship product used to be Captain Morgan rum, but it is now Captain Morgan spiced, and it is growing massively. So these are good points and things to take note of. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Vaughn. And that leads into what I'm about to say, because I do recognize that some of these developments are not necessarily at this time relevant for the region. But of course, you have to be aware of what's going on. And from an IP perspective, I know we're not engaging in a lot of technical innovation and so on, but it still does not mean that you should not pay a lot of attention to IP. So some simple, or maybe let's say some relevant suggestions would be that you should ensure you have internal policies addressing IP issues. And this speaks to understanding, as I said earlier, the value of your processes, your internal processes, your customer list, your distribution agreements, business plans and strategies, your pricing list. All of these have value from an IP perspective. You should have considered how you will secure confidentiality and trade secrets within your organization. These issues should be clearly covered as well in employment contracts and in terms of contracts with third parties. You have there, simple, well, what I think are simple, but actually a lot of people overlook. You engage someone to take photos for your website or to develop a website for you. Ensure you have, agreements that clearly state that the rights in this content the rights are being transferred to you, so you have control of them. Consumer data. For example, some of you have offer tours. Are you collecting consumer data from the people who are taking the tours? Are you collecting data through if you outsource your marketing and so on, and surveys are being done? This data has a lot of potential value, and you should be ensuring that especially where you're using third parties, you're clear about the ownership of the data being collected, the use, and the use of that data. So you need to look at your agreements and not just outsource this, but actively manage and analyze the data being collected. You will have internal innovations. Employees from time to time may proactively offer suggestions in terms of how to improve your internal processes, etc. Or there may be deliberate changes made. You should be ensuring that all of these innovations are carefully reviewed and documented and considered from a strategic perspective as far as IP is concerned, because some of these innovations may be subject to protection. I'm not suggesting go and just register trademarks or patents or whatever for everything you do, but you should carefully consider them to see what value are they really offering and what value is there in terms of making these innovations exclusive to the organization. Sorry. Okay. I wanted this, I'm wrapping up. But I wanted to speak specifically on the issue of GIs, because I know this is really important for the regional rum industry. Certainly, I definitely agree that, you know, we should have GIs in place, and we should also recognize geographical indications as one of a number of tools. So on their own, they're not going to achieve premium pricing and all these fantastic returns. We need to have the GIs. We need to have the, you know, rum clearly defined as a category. The premium market is driven in large part by provenance, origin, and the GI will help to achieve these things, standards. And this is all against a backdrop of discussions not only concerning rum, but they've had the discussion with Scotch, they've had the discussion with Tennessee whiskey. And this is, as you develop the specifications for the GI, you do have to understand the need for control and assess the space that is allowed for innovation or experimentation. We also need to understand the context in terms of the competitive environment. I can't remember if it was specifically for rum or for spirits, but I read that between 2016 and 2019, over 960 premium products entered the market. Now, all of this has to be considered in terms of protection of the category. So you have to look at it from a very strategic perspective. And importantly, when you do have the GI in place, you need to know what the strategies will be. And, you know, having a GI can mean that you have to really expend a number of resources in terms of the management of the GI, monitoring the market, issues such as enforcement, and very importantly, the marketing, so that consumers are educated about the GI. And these are not one-off investments. These are ongoing investments. So you need to be clear at the national level and at the organizational level about, you know, your governance strategies and the resource commitments that will be made. And you're not just monitoring GIs, you have to monitor trademarks globally as well, trademark applications globally, to ensure there are no conflicting registrations. So it is not a light undertaking. And once you've had a GI in place for a while, you need to really think of doing economic impact assessments. You need to understand, is the GI function as it should? Where are the gaps? Have we been able to achieve premium pricing and positioning in the marketplace? And to what extent is this as a result of the GI, or it could be as a result of the individual brand trademark, or both, or simply because of the high quality of the product? But importantly, you don't just have the GI, you have to consider how you will assess its impact and effect in the future. And that's my presentation. I'm open to questions, but I want to, at this time, turn over to my colleague, Alison Damas. Alison assisted me with this research, and she'll explain how she did so and what she does. So Alison?
Sorry, just just before you go off of GIs, because I'm not sure we're going to come back to it. I think, you know, what you say is quite relevant, because I mean, I think, you know, there are two threads to the whole GI story, and I say this about GIs because it's such a popular issue right now. We have some companies who are well on their way, some countries that are well on their way to developing national GIs, and there are other countries that are saying, well, if everybody's talking about this, should we be doing this too? You know, so Guyana, Barbados, Jamaica, the Dominican Republic are all moving along the road to establishing GIs and getting them known overseas, and grappling with the cost and all the challenges of bringing together all the producers and so on. For instance, in the Dominican Republic, they were well on their way to establishing a PDO, which is a protected denomination of origin, when a group of producers who actually don't ferment and distill Dominican rum caused the whole thing to come to a stop, because they challenged the definition of the PDO. And they're still grappling with that and a few other issues. So it's been a challenging road, and smaller countries like Belize and Grenada and so on must be asking themselves, is this something we should go after? So I think you're well advised to learn a lot more about it before you jump in. And I think this is one of the problems we've had. People have jumped in before they've learned about what are the true costs, what are the expected benefits. And, you know, when we talk about the economic impact of GIs, a lot of data comes out of very pro-GI organizations in Europe about how GIs gave a 50% advantage to the price of a particular cheese or something like that. And I like to say, listen, be very careful about how you expect economic price benefit from establishing a GI, because in a sense, Caribbean rums were GIs long before there was a thing called a GI. Our rums were some of the early traded products known by their reputation and their origin. So Barbados, Guyana, Jamaica, Trinidad, those rums would have been traded internationally, you know, as 250 years ago, and particularly valued one way or another because of their origin. So in fact, they were the first GIs, is a point I make. So I don't think that there is a marketing benefit necessarily from establishing a GI. I mean, I'm quite prepared to discuss it, but my sense is that it is not about marketing, it's about protecting your IP. Is there a threat to Belizean rum in the absence of a GI? And I think this is what countries need to be asking themselves. Is there a threat to our identity, our national identity for this product if we don't have a GI? And I think that has to drive whether you go for a GI or for something else. And I mean, this was a discussion we had a lot amongst WOSPA members in the early days of the formation of the Authentic Caribbean Rum mark, because the direction we went in was really to establish, in a sense, what is, to all intents and purposes, something like a collective mark that could provide overall identity that consumers could recognize, that would enhance the reputation and provenance of our products, especially for the smaller producers, because they don't have the ability to go out there. And it's important, because if you're talking about getting your GI known to consumers, that's a horrendously expensive job. Even with a mark, we spent something like 12 million euro promoting it over 2 chunks with European money. And that promotion was really just to the trade. To consumers, you'd have to spend a lot more. I mean, if you look at the marketing budgets for just something like Malibu these days, you know, it's approaching 100 million in just like in a few markets. So it's serious money to reach a consumer. And so I think companies ought to be careful how they jump on a very popular bandwagon and really assess and learn about these things before they get into them. So I think that I just wanted to make that overall point.
No, I agree. I think certainly for, all right, let me not call any countries. For the Caribbean, I suspect It may be largely driven by the growing competitive marketplace, but and the need to really, or the desire to really carve out a definition for premium or super premium, and have that attached to the region. But the fact is, it will require tremendous resources for each country that has it. And this is on top of you individually managing your individual trademarks as well. So there are benefits, but as you say, there should be a clear awareness of the resource requirements. So Allison?
Okay. All right, so let me share my screen. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank my colleague, Erica Smith, for inviting me to piggyback on her thesis on IP and Caribbean rum brands, and also to Vaughan for graciously accepting Erica's suggestion. So Erica has focused on intellectual property rights in relation to Caribbean rum brands. And I am going to pivot and focus on an aspect of marketing strategy, which has to do with listening to conversations in the media, whether it be traditional media, digital media, online news sites, as well as social channels, to what people are saying about Caribbean rum brands. So in order to support Erica's study, we looked at global mentions of these 6 Caribbean rum brands. And please blame Erica for her choice of these 6, not me. And we looked closely at what was being said about them across primarily online and digital channels in terms of how they measure up each other, because an important element of marketing strategy is competitive intelligence. If you want to maintain your market lead, or maybe even become the market leader, you have to be acutely aware of what your competitors in your industry are doing. What are customers saying about their rum products? And how can you learn from maybe their customer pains in order to gain a competitive edge? So we looked at these 6 rum brands over the period October 2019 to November 2021. And my question is to Michelle Smith, which one of these brands do you think gained the most number of mentions? But in fact, no surprise, it is Jamaica's Wray & Nephew brand. So sorry.
Sorry, Allison?
Yes.
In terms of mentions, we're talking about
Yes.
Caribbean here.
Yes.
Okay. And
No, sorry. So let me explain. We are talking about mentions globally, right? So across the world, and including, of course, the Caribbean, but also because we know that export marketing is very critical for rum brands.
okay, so I just want to say that, in fact, I am surprised because Wray & Nephew Overproof is essentially one SKU, which is the Overproof white rum. So that's quite a strong pull from what is basically one product against other brands, for instance, Appleton Estate, which is a suite of 6 or so different premium products and similar things to the other companies. Okay.
So I'm gonna start by focusing on earned media And earned media is basically, unlike advertising, theoretically you're not supposed to pay for it, so it's free and therefore very cost effective. But it's also more credible than paid media, because earned media is basically what third parties are saying about your brand, be they journalists, bloggers, consumers on social media talking about your brands. So as I mentioned, Wray and Nephew had the largest share of voice over the period of the study. And if you notice here, there are two peaks, right? So the first peak was at the onset of the pandemic. This was around March 2020, where Wray and Nephew donated substantially to the government of Jamaica and also contributed alcohol, which is of course critical for sanitizers. And then a few months later, again, mentions also peaked. This had to do, I think there were a series of incidents, including a break-in at one of the estates, closure of one of the Appleton estates. Second, we can see here is Appleton Estate. And then coming in third is Plantation. Now, what's interesting is that whilst Wray and Nephew had the largest share of voice, i.e. the highest number of mentions, when it came to engagement, Appleton Estate led the way. And what I mean by engagement is basically points of interaction, whether it be on online news sites or social channels, primarily Twitter, where people, would like, comment, share, retweet, as the case may be. So Appleton Estates had the highest engagement over the period under review.
Yeah, I think just the button here again,
Yes.
as mentioned by Michelle Samuels, who is in CSR at Wray and Nephew.
Sorry, I meant Michelle Samuels, not Smith. My mistake. I apologize.
But no, she wasn't correcting you. She's too polite for that. But no, she was saying something that I was also thinking, of course. In the first chart, I looked at it and thought, of course, it was the earned media was really just about the brand. But I can see now that all of the CSR effort of Wray and Nephew, which is a corporate entity, but which is also the brand name,
Yes.
is combined in your graphs. So that, for instance, you can bump up that if you have a lot of CSR attention to CSR activity. And so perhaps that makes a bit more sense now. Okay.
All right, so I'm glad that you're validating the data one. All right. And again, I thought this was interesting that early in the pandemic, there were two online news topics that contributed to the spikes. So there was an article in Gear Patrol, right, about the 14 best bottles of rums you can buy in 2020. It should be 2020, I think. And Plantation Barbados, that's just how it was branded, Plantation Barbados, was the #1 in that. And then also we had Angostura of TNT, where 25,000 bottles of hand sanitizers were distributed to first responders. Again, another indication of the power of public relations and CSR initiatives in terms of really driving your mentions and therefore, your brand awareness and engagement. Now, in terms of the media types monitored, as I mentioned, about over 50% of these mentions came from Twitter. And that's because Twitter has what's known as an open public fire hose. In other words, if I tweet about Rhea Nephew, everyone can see it, right? Whereas if I posted on my Facebook page that I like Mongay, there's no tracking service that will be able to pick it up because Facebook, or I should say, has they have stringent privacy policies when it comes to that. So we can only track business pages. So we have, following Twitter, we have forums contributed more brand mentions than any other media type. And these included, like I mentioned, online news sites, we have blogs, YouTube, we also had some newspaper, magazines, and so on.
Alison, if I can
Yes,
just note,
sure.
one of the things I noted was that there's so many blogs dealing with rum out there.
Yes,
And one of the questions I've had was, are any of them controlled regionally? Because it means, I was told that there was one maybe, but it means that a lot of the conversation can be developed outside of the region. So
yeah. And in fact, it seems, as I will show you at the end, that most of those conversations and therefore the blogs and so are being generated in the US. So that's a good point. So again, there's opportunity for us in the region to be able to talk about our brands, especially if we're doing it online, because online, as we know, goes global, opportunity to go viral.
Yeah, the conversation framework on social media for spirits is complex, and maybe it's complex for everything. For rum, there's a strong group of enthusiasts that use Facebook and Reddit. Much more Facebook than Reddit, but also Reddit. And the bloggers out there get the traction when they post their blogs onto Facebook. So it's interesting. I mean, there's several Caribbean people of Caribbean origin who blog and share on Facebook with rum, but there definitely is a lack of a Caribbean voice internationally, in the Caribbean and internationally, with that's talking about rum. And this is something we're very challenged with. Each brand, of course, has regional voices because they can, but from the point of view of a region, talking about rum objectively, we really have a lack of authentic and credible speakers.
Yes, and even as you mentioned, Vaughn, even though we may have bloggers from in the diaspora, originally from the region, they may not be able to attract the size of audiences, that, let's say, a Rolling Stones magazine might, probably has. And on that note of engagement and reach, so I thought it was interesting that over the period of the study, the potential reach, the number of people potentially that would have been reached by the mentions of these 6 rum brands, it's 10.3 trillion. In terms of the sharing of engagement, it's interesting to note that YouTube registered the highest engagement, and that was driven primarily by 5 YouTube posts with very large audiences. And again, none of these YouTube channels were Caribbean channels. And that's followed then by online news articles. Now, when we look now at gender demographics, and I suppose no surprise here, in terms of rum, we see that males are more likely to post to engage than females. And particularly in relation to El Dorado, we see that El Dorado share is 72% male, 28% female. I thought that was interesting. Also interested in the fact that Ray Nephew has the youngest audience, right? 44% in the 18 to 24 age group, right? Plantation has the oldest in terms of the over 65. There's some interesting points in terms of who's your target audience, who's your target customers, and how is the best way to reach them in terms of your marketing strategy. Also, a key element of competitive intelligence is knowing what your competitors' customers are saying about your brands. Are there any particular pain points? And if so, how can you capitalize on that knowledge to be able to position your brand to become more likable, therefore increase engagement, awareness, and ultimately, your bottom line. So it's interesting that El Dorado has the highest net sentiment. And basically what net sentiment means is you cancel out all the neutral sentiment and you compare your positives with the negatives. And I mentioned Rolling Stone, and I noted that one of the reasons that El Dorado attracted such positive sentiment, they got a lot of engagement on a Rolling Stone article in which they were listed as the top 10 rum brands in the world. That was really interesting. So kudos to El Dorado. And this is followed pretty closely by Plantation at 74.6%, and then Mount Gay at 72%. Right. Moving on now. Yes,
Alison,
sorry.
I mean, I think what that does is really underline the benefits from what brands do, which is really is to work very hard to have the ear of spirits journalists, to be there when they call, to respond,
Yes.
and to get yourself mentioned in these articles, because
Yeah.
I mean, one Rolling Stone article to influence feedback so much is a really positive thing. And more spirits is of interest to media, to drinks media, and they're talking a lot about rum, and it just shows that it is really quite important to get your foot in the door, and to meet journalists when it's possible, to talk to them, to follow up, keep in touch, and so on.
Right. And then last slide in terms of the earned media section is the where are these conversations about Caribbean rum brands taking place. We see that the US accounts for more than half, 53% of all the mentions came from users with United States. And this is important. Now, these are users with United States set as their location. That doesn't mean that they are actually located in the US, because a lot of us in the Caribbean, we have US-based VPNs, which means that we would be tagged as being located in the US. But this is important to note. And among these US users, Ray Nephew has the largest share, 35%, followed by Appleton, and then Plantation. The second largest market we see for mentions is the UK, United Kingdom. And then in the Caribbean, this is then followed by Jamaica. Again, testimony to the work primarily, I imagine, being done by both communications and marketing teams at these companies. All right, and to end now, I'm just going to share, it's a completely different scene. I thought it was quite interesting in contrast. When it comes to paid media, focusing now on Barbados, and we're looking at traditional media. So this is radio, television, and newspapers. And we see that there is a definite, downward trend over the 2-year period. And even for Q4 2021, this is unlikely to match 2020, far less 2019. And this is looking at not only rum, but beers, whiskey, as well as wine. And we also see again, when we look at these various categories, the 4 categories I mentioned, that the rum share investment, the rum is in green, has been declining. It's average about 35%, and it's dropped to 24% for the first 3 quarters of 2021. We will wait to see. We'll know certainly by end of December whether there is any rebound. So that's the end of my presentation. Any questions?
Well, I would say, Alison, and maybe I'm setting you up for another study.
Go ahead, Erica.
When I listen, for example, I listen to the radio here, and I've been paying more attention because of this work. I question whether at least in Barbados, if the market here is seen as viable for the premium product, because the advertising is not indicative of treating the product as premium. So I don't know the internal strategies and so on, but and also when I listen to the amount of time that, for example, Remy and some of the non-rum products get, it seems to me like those are pushed more. I don't know if it's felt that there isn't a need to advertise as much, or maybe I'm not getting a full picture, but it would be interesting to understand as the.
I don't know if we have any Barbados rum brand managers in this session. But I would suspect, this is my thinking, and I stand to be corrected, that in terms of rum, like you said, premium rums, the focus, I think, is probably more on the export market as opposed to the local market. Although you would think that certainly Q4 and for Barbados, well, I guess not having crop over might also account for it. But certainly in Q4, you would expect to see some increase in investment in local advertising for rum brands.
That was just an observation I had.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's true to say that for many of our brands, the local market is a difficult space for premium products. I mean, of course, our objective is really to get everybody to drink better quality. And of course, then to pay more for that better quality. But the fact is that local markets really are a lot about standard products. And so it is perhaps the trend to do your promotion more through, do your sales and marketing more through promotions and events. Although having said that, I mean, that would have suffered a lot during COVID. I know, for instance, one company that has a view that it will not advertise on radio or TV at all. And I don't think they new newspapers, because they consider that the availability of these media to underage consumers would be poor CSR on their part. And there is an increasing level of focus by health advocates on how the industry advertises. And I think just generally, for the rum industry as purveyors of a lot of premium products. We don't want to get dirty down in the trenches of heavy traditional media advertising. There is a lot of that coming from ready-to-drink products and other non-spirit products that we see, but you don't see a lot of it from rum, and that's the truth.
Okay, well, thank you very much. If there are no further questions.
I don't see any questions popping up. I mean, I think, Alison, I didn't really expect your presentation until I spoke to Erica recently about it. And so I think it was quite a nice add-on to what Erica is talking to us about. I think together they work really well. Brands clearly need to be much more organized with their IP, to be much more hard-nosed about it, and to really, as you say, look at your IP even before you launch a product. You know, where's your IP protection for this product, where you registered, etc. And then once you're in the market and you're marketing, you know what people are talking, how are you encouraging people to talk about your product? And as you get down to specify more what is perhaps CSR and what's actual brand mentions and so on, and the conversations those generate, and how you can best take advantage of the different channels out there. I think that's extremely interesting for our brands. I mean, just as an anecdotal input, we've had at least 2 sessions now with our members talking about how they manage their social media, particularly for their premium lines, because people want stories, they want to see the people behind the scenes making the rum and so on. But by and large, unfortunately, what we get a lot of pretty bottles of rum and pictures of cocktails and people enjoying the product, but we don't get to see behind the scenes. And this is, I think, increasingly when you look at successful international brands, super premium, people are going behind the scenes and showing more than just the bottle and just the cocktail and just the people outdoors or whatever enjoying it. So this is, I think, it's all tied up together, and I want to thank both of you for these 2 really interesting presentations.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
They're all connected: marketing strategy, IP strategy, and your overall business strategy.
Okay, great. So without any further ado, final thank you to you both and to everybody who joined the session. Really pleased to have had this interaction, and perhaps we'll have you back on again to continue some of these conversations.
So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.